politicians have some explaining to do.
Those figures just don't add up.
You're not comparing light with light.
Why can't you just answer the question?
Over 4 programs, senior policymakers face their political opponents.
Why can't you just answer the question?
Politics is rarely black and white.
Brian Wilson faces Anne Mackenzie's cross-examination. Tonight at 10:40, BBC One Scotland.
From Shakespeare to Star Trek, a profile of the actor who's now best known as Captain Picard, Patrick Stewart, tomorrow at 11:45. Now on BBC One Scotland, the news with Peter Sissons. It's 10 o'clock.
Lord Archer on trial. The perjury case against him goes to a jury. It's alleged he won a famous libel case after fixing a false alibi. Saving the pound, Hague admits it's not quite the last chance. 100 days of foot and mouth and no end in sight to the slaughter. A picture of Norway's royalty, the Queen with the child of the single mother her son is going to marry.
And here in Scotland, William Hague tries to woo Scottish voters as he tours marginal seats. And a man dies after being buried in a landslip on the banks of the River Tay.
Good evening. Lord Archer relived a famous courtroom victory today as he stood in the dock accused of winning it through perjury and perverting the course of justice. The charges that he's now facing at the Old Bailey arise from a libel trial 13 years ago when he won £500,000 from a newspaper which had accused him of having sex with a prostitute. In all, the multi-millionaire author and former deputy chairman of the Conservative Party denies 7 charges. His former friend, Ted Francis, with whom it's alleged he concocted an alibi, denies 1, perverting the course of justice.
Lord Archer swept up to the front door of the court at the start of his criminal trial. He was joined by his wife Mary and one of his sons, William. With dozens of cameramen recording the moment, Lord and Lady Archer looked relaxed as they entered. Moments before, Lord Archer's co-defendant, Ted Francis, on the left, also arrived, the writer and producer ready for the start of this case. With Ted Francis and Lord Archer in the dock, the prosecution counsel, David Waters, said this was a simple case about false alibis and forged diaries. He said it involved criminal behaviour during Lord Archer's attempts to win his libel action against the Star newspaper 13 years ago, a case where it was claimed Lord Archer slept with a prostitute. Lord Archer won that libel case and was awarded £500,000 damages. But the prosecution now say he acted dishonestly then by trying to alter the facts. First by changing entries on 2 office diaries, and second by getting friends to concoct stories over his whereabouts. One meeting where Jeffrey Archer allegedly tried to cover his tracks took place in this London restaurant. The prosecution claimed he persuaded Ted Francis to say the two were dining here. At the same time, he, Archer, was accused of being with the prostitute. They say Lord Archer later paid Ted Francis £12,000. But the prosecution say Lord Archer's attempts to keep the lid on his secrets came unstuck 2 years ago when he was campaigning to be Mayor of London. Ted Francis decided he wasn't fit to hold such a position and told his story to a Sunday newspaper. The case itself is due to last 3 to 4 weeks. Both Lord Archer and Ted Francis deny all the charges against them, and the trial will continue again in the morning. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News at the Old Bailey.
William Hague's election strategy came under fire from all sides today, including from some in his own party. 2 senior Tory backbenchers criticised the party's emphasis on Europe. One said it would be folly to ignore other issues. The Conservatives also hedged their warning that this election was the last chance to save the pound.
Rain or shine, bad polls and more bad polls, William Hague is refusing to accept that things are going wrong for the Tories. Today he campaigned on tax cuts. But he'll be back on Europe soon, ignoring the talk that his main message is confused and the Tories' prospects won't brighten up until he changes the subject. Was he heading for defeat?
No, certainly not. We don't take any notice of opinion polls.
Good morning and welcome to the Conservative press conference.
But today, more questions about their big campaign slogan. The Shadow Chancellor tried to justify calling this election a referendum on the euro. Did that mean they'd give up if they lost? No, and now it wasn't quite the last chance to save the pound. So what was it?
This may be the last fair vote that they get on the subject.
Back to Mr. Hague in Scotland, denying any change, any contradiction, holding the line.
It's exactly the same thing. As you know, I've been making the case for some days now that no one will get a fair referendum from the Labour Party, that they've already rigged the rules for the funding, that they would set a loaded question, that they would choose the timing at their convenience. Therefore, it is our whole case that this is the last fair vote about the pound.
Mr. Hague's also conceded there's a good chance of a vote for the euro in a referendum. For some pro-European Tories, it's all too much. Ian Taylor's one of two former ministers who are calling the intense campaigning on the euro a mistake. Mr. Taylor called it folly. And today, the Lib Dem leader, Charles Kennedy, felt the Tories were in trouble.
I wouldn't be surprised that the Conservatives are now having to reassess and regroup to such a drastic extent that this is becoming a damage limitation exercise for them.
Tonight, on the BBC's Question Time programme, Tony Blair dismissed the notion of a rigged referendum.
The reason why William Hague's got to say that the question is going to be rigged or the referendum is going to be rigged is because he wants to make this election about the euro, because he's got nothing else, frankly, to say about the serious issues facing the country.
Tony Blair denies he's complacent, but there's no denying Labour's confidence. As for Mr. Hague, he's refusing to buckle under pressure. And the signs are that Europe and the euro will continue to run through the final stages of his campaign. That's his decision. Whatever happens to the Tories in this election, the buck stops with him. John Pienaar, BBC News, Westminster.
The Liberal Democrat leader Charles Kennedy says he'll use the last week of the election to demonstrate that his party will replace the Conservatives as the opposition if Labour are re-elected. Mr. Kennedy believes his party will represent the only coherent alternative to the Tories. Gavin Hewitt is with the Kennedy campaign.
First stop for Charles Kennedy today, an ambulance station in Kingston. He's a quietly spoken campaigner and his visits are often low-key. Just a couple of questions from a class of trainee ambulance drivers. There's little razzmatazz about this campaign. In a Kingston shopping precinct, there was a kiss from Honor Blackman, a former Bond girl who declared him sexy, but there was no real working of the crowd. In recent days, he's raised his ambitions to replace the Tories as the effective opposition.
Now, the Conservatives are not going to be in a fit state to provide an opposition, but we quite clearly are, because we've had a good campaign, the party's in good heart.
He is a leader trying to convince the voters he's a different type of plain-speaking politician, but his critics say it's the stance of a man who knows he won't face the difficult choices of being in power. If there is one reason why people should vote for you and vote for the Liberal Democrats, what is it?
Honesty is the key issue that we're presenting in this campaign.
Let's be cynical for a moment. You're selling honesty. Is there such a thing as an honest politician?
Yes, there is such a thing as an honest politician, and I'd hope to think that you're looking at one.
Charles Kennedy said today that if voters knew who was going to win, then the most important question was who would provide the opposition. And that's what he'd be talking about for the rest of the campaign. Like many politicians, Charles Kennedy shies away from making predictions. But as we enter the final week of this campaign, he and the Liberal Democrats are just daring to believe that they might exceed their own modest expectations. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, Astrid Genlais.
Two new opinion polls out tonight suggest that the Conservative assault on the euro has had little impact. But William Hague says Labour don't do as well as when it comes to the real elections. Here's Peter Snow.
3 weeks of campaigning have put the Liberal Democrats up a little at the expense of Labour. And all the mainstream pollsters now reckon the Tories are in deep trouble, despite their campaign on the euro. Gallup in tomorrow's Daily Telegraph has Labour on 47, the Tories 31, and the Liberal Democrats on 16. Maury in the Times has Labour on 48, the Tories 30, and the Liberal Democrats also on 16. Now look at that against the background of the battle so far. There's Labour, never below 45, the Tories never above 32, and the Liberal Democrats between 17 and 11. Most worrying for the Tories is this morning's Guardian poll, where ICM, normally the kindest of the Tories, put them at their lowest for 2 years. Add tonight's two polls and you get a clear pattern. On average, since the start, Labour are down a little from 51 to 47, the Tories down slightly too, and the Liberal Democrats up from 13 to 16 now. The essential story is that Labour's lead is almost as big as it was 3 weeks ago. But is William Hague right to claim that Labour will score much lower in the real vote? Well, it's true that people voting in local council by-elections over the past 6 months have shown Labour scoring 32%, the Conservatives 35%, and the Liberal Democrats 28%. But these are local elections. And Plymouth University Elections Centre, who gave us these figures, say that this pattern in a general election would see Labour much higher and the Liberal Democrats much lower. And why isn't the euro helping the Tories in the polls? Perhaps because most people say it's not an important issue for them. And look at this. Gallup in tomorrow's Telegraph asks people what they think about joining the euro. 11% say Britain should join as soon as possible. 46% say Britain should probably join, but not yet. 20% say it would not be a good idea, and another 20% say never. Half, 40%, less than half, firmly against. That's all. It's by no means so clear-cut as the usual yes-no type polls have suggested.
And our political editor, Andrew Marr, joins us from Westminster. Andrew, the Conservatives must despair of moving these polls. Do you expect them to come up with any new ideas in the final week?
No, not really. I think William Hague has tied the tiller, as it were, and is pursuing the Euro campaign. It's, 7 days to go to save the pound, 5 days to go, 4 days to go. You can't suddenly change direction when you're doing that. And they cling on to the hope, which is a genuine belief, that the pound is more popular than the Conservative Party in the country at the moment. The odd thing is not that there's been whispers of dissent tonight. The odd thing, frankly, is that the mood is so resolute and at least outwardly cheerful in the Conservative camp. And I think that's because they believe that Tory England is still out there, hasn't died. It may have died off in other parts of the country, mind you, but it's still there in England. And that there are a lot of people hiding behind the privet hedges and their net curtains who will come out and vote on the day. Nevertheless, these are very, very grim figures, and I think there will be a lot of heart-searching in central office about their failure to go harder on issues like health and education earlier in the campaign.
Briefly, Andrew, is it possible to judge whether this election campaign has even connected with the people who many believe may have made up their minds long ago?
Well, it is very, very odd. It feels as if there has been a bubble campaign composed of journalists and politicians, and the country has been looking the other way. Of course, no one knows what voters are really thinking. It's a bit like a crocodile. You think it's asleep, you assume it's asleep, but maybe it's watching you, and maybe it's a bit peckish, and maybe it's feeling a bit snappy.
Andrew Marr, thank you. And on Newsnight at 10:30 over on BBC Two, Jeremy Paxman interviews the SNP leader, John Swinney. The government's chief scientist has warned there will be further outbreaks of foot and mouth. Professor David King, speaking on the 100th day of the crisis, stressed to farmers the importance of maintaining a strict regime to try to prevent its spread. But the human cost was all too starkly illustrated today, with the suicide of a Yorkshire farm worker blamed on the strain of coping with the epidemic. Fergus Walsh reports.
Andrew Keithley hanged himself 2 days ago, leaving a partner and 2 children. He was devastated when foot and mouth forced the closure of the cattle market at Otley, where he worked. His father says he then helped out on local farms, but became increasingly paranoid that he might spread the disease.
I saw my son go from a fit, strong, healthy lad to a total wreck in 2 or 3 days, and I would just please ask everybody to be so vigilant. And he just left us a note to say that foot and mouth disease and his love of his job in farming killed him.
It is 100 days since the first case, 100 days in which parts of the rural landscape have become an alien land. At this farm in Cheshire, scene of a recent outbreak, workers were collecting and burning wool, anything which might be infected. Government scientists say computer predictions suggest it's not over yet.
The models are showing that this outbreak will continue to bump along, but under control for quite a little time now. I would say it's going to carry on until the middle of the summer.
Farmers are being urged to remain vigilant and maintain stringent controls against foot and mouth. It's thought the latest cluster around Settle in North Yorkshire was spread by movements of people, vehicles or animals.
The single most infectious animal disease was never going to disappear quietly from Britain, and far from being over in time for the election, it now looks as if foot and mouth will be here into July and even August. Fergus Walsh, BBC News, at the Ministry of Agriculture.
One of France's political elite, the former Foreign Minister Roland Dumas, has been sent to prison for 6 months at the end of France's biggest post-war sleaze trial. Following lurid revelations of sex, greed and ambition, he was found guilty of conspiring with his former mistress to siphon off funds from the then state-owned oil giant Elf Aquitaine.
He's 78, he's facing 6 months in prison, but he looks as suave as ever. Roland Dumas arrived in court today, still protesting his innocence, but one of France's most celebrated movers and shakers was found guilty of corruption. Among those also convicted was Dumas' former lover, Christine Devier-Joncourt. She was given a job at the former state-owned oil company, Elf, and she channeled millions of dollars to her lover and an amazing array of gifts, such as £1,000 shoes bought at this exclusive boutique. She admitted her role, but outside the court today, she told us she was being made a scapegoat.
I'm very upset, but I want to go on fighting.
Today's verdict is a blow not just to Elf Oil, but to all the French politicians, both socialist and conservative, who stand accused of using the company as a giant slush fund. At one stage in the case, Dumas' lawyer turned to the court and asked, "Do you really have such contempt for politics that you believe everything is a stitch-up?" Well, the answer handed down today was, in effect, yes. This is a verdict not just against Dumas and his co-accused, but against the entire French political culture. Justin Webb, BBC News, Paris.
President Bush's daughter Jenna is in trouble again. She's been caught trying to buy alcohol using somebody else's identity card. Just a few weeks ago, Jenna, who's 19, pleaded guilty to possessing alcohol. She was caught drinking beer in a bar in Austin in Texas, where she's a student. The legal drinking age in the state is 21. A court in Munich has sentenced the former Nazi concentration camp guard to life in prison for murdering a Jewish inmate in 1944. Anton Malott, who's 89, was also convicted of attempting to kill another prisoner at the Theresienstadt camp in Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia. Extra police officers will be on standby tomorrow when England's cricketers take on Pakistan in the second test at Old Trafford. The match comes after days of rioting between whites and Asians in Oldham, just a few miles from the ground.
An unorthodox training session for England's cricketers today. There is a good spirit among the squad. But tomorrow's test match against Pakistan comes in the shadow of racial tensions in Oldham, just 10 miles away. Security around the ground will be tight.
We're out there playing cricket against Pakistan, and hopefully both sets of supporters will come down and see good cricket in the way it should be watched.
Those organising the fixture have warned extremists they have no place here.
We're keeping close to the police and the local council with their intelligence units to see if there's anything coming out of that, but at the present moment there isn't a problem.
Ensuring this ground is a safe environment for fans is a priority for all concerned with the test match. Greater Manchester Police stress they're treating the game as a routine sporting event, but will make extra officers available if needed.
All right, there, keep that.
A simple gesture that proved good public relations for England.
Now, does this mean divided loyalties for you? Who are you going to be supporting tomorrow? Now that I've got a cup, I think I'll have to support England.
But other fans won't be turned so easily. Daniela Ralph, BBC News, Old Trafford.
The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh are paying a state visit to Norway. They've already met the Crown Prince, who's at the centre of a controversy about his choice of bride. And tonight at a royal banquet, the Queen dined on reindeer. Our correspondent Jenny Bond is there.
The Queen and King Harold are third cousins who share more than ancestral ties. For the Norwegian monarchy is experiencing problems that will be only too familiar. The heir to the throne has fallen in love with a woman deemed by some to be unsuitable, a single mother he met at a pop festival. The Queen, though, is here to endorse a different partnership between two countries.
Our cultural ties are also strong. Norway seems to have a large appetite for the works of British artists of every kind, from Brit art to Brit pop.
The Norwegian royal family have tackled their domestic difficulties head-on. Crown Prince Haakon and his fiancée have posed for pictures with her son, whose father has a drugs conviction. The king has sanctioned an August wedding, and Queen Sonja has done her best to allay public unease by allowing cameras to witness informal scenes like this, designed to show how she and the king have accepted their future daughter-in-law and her child. They're gambling on the popularity of the Crown Prince.
I think if people had been told 2 years ago that we would have a single mum as our next queen, I think they would be quite shocked. But people respect the Crown Prince.
Family problems are certainly nothing new to the Queen, but she may be interested to see how King Harold and Queen Sonja's tactic of simply accepting a tricky situation appears to have paid off. Public outrage here has now been largely quelled. Jenny Bond, BBC News in Oslo.
Now back to the election, and the parties have been spelling out their policies to try to win the pensioner vote. They all promise to boost the basic pension, and they have different pledges on long-term care for the elderly. Neil Dixon reports on what's on offer to older voters.
On the seafront at Eastbourne this afternoon, evidence of one of the great social changes of our time, the greying of the nation. At this election, 1 voter in 4 will be elderly. Small wonder then that all the main parties are promising a bigger state pension. Not before time, according to many recipients.
I have to dig into my savings in order to live. The pension wouldn't, you couldn't live on the pension, not at all.
We're always hoping that there'd be more, because circumstances do change.
Each year our money's going down and down, and it's not being replaced by anything.
May I have a cup of tea, please?
What the politicians are not promising is to restore the link between the basic pension and earnings. More elderly people are likely to be expected to provide for themselves, with means-tested benefits for the poor. Today, though, the Tories claimed they'd found a better way.
The first thing that we will do is improve the basic state pension by taking money from other areas of the social security budget for the people over 75, who are often the people who get missed out, who are often the poorest of the pensioners.
And for those in long-term care like Connie Walker, the politicians are also offering some help. She'll be 100 years old in July and her savings are running out. Now she must sell her flat to pay the nursing home fees of £600 a week.
I think it's a shame that you've got to get rid of everything in order to live as long as I have. I don't want to live. I didn't want to live to be 100. You have no choice, though, have you?
Only better off residents have to pay fees now, and Labour and the Conservatives say in future the state will help by paying for the specialist nursing care. But the Liberal Democrats go further. They say all the care should be free.
That will mean that people don't have to plunder their savings or even sell their houses to pay for their care costs.
We are making provision for free nursing care. We're putting a lot of money now into social services in order to try and provide for people better in their own homes, where many people want to be looked after.
All the main political parties are promising a brighter future for Britain's elderly people. In reality, though, they're trying to balance the need to help the poorest with the desire to be seen to be doing something for everyone. Neil Dixon, BBC News, Eastbourne.
So could any party afford to be more generous to Britain's pensioners? Peter Morgan has been looking at the figures.
Britain's 11 million pensioners represent an increasingly important, increasingly vocal constituency. Yet almost a third are so poor they qualify for welfare payments on top of their state benefit. Many feel badly done by, and this is why. Basic pensions used to rise in line with average earnings. But back in 1980, with pensions at just over £27, the Conservatives broke that link. Since then, pensions have moved in line with inflation, which means the basic pension today is £72.50 instead of the £101 it would have been if the link with pay had been maintained. So why not just restore the earnings link?
The expenditure on the basic state pension, if you earnings index it, would grow very quickly and you'd have to increase taxes to pay for it.
It's simply too expensive.
You could afford to do it if you wanted to, but you'd have to increase taxes to do it, and that's what the government parties don't want to do.
Following protests at a meagre 75p increase in the basic pension, all the major parties now say they'll pay more. Labour plans to increase pensions by £3 for a single person, £4.80 for a married couple, topped up with a minimum income guarantee of around £97 if you're single, £140 for married couples. The Conservatives say they'd match Labour increases next year with an extra £1 for over 75s, £2 for a married couple. The Lib Dems are promising a £5 increase for the single pensioner, £10 for the over 75s and £15 for the over 80s. These are big spending commitments which can only get bigger because as a country we're ageing fast, living longer and having fewer kids. These blue boxes show the expected increase in our population. The red boxes show how fast the number of over 65s will grow, all getting pensions paid for by a shrinking workforce. Not only do the elderly make up an increasing share of the electorate, but older people are far more likely to vote than the young, so politicians had better watch out. Grey voters punch above their weight.
It was one of the most dramatic moments of the last general election, when Michael Portillo lost his once safe seat of Enfield Southgate to a virtually unknown Labour candidate. It powerfully symbolised the huge scale of the Conservative defeat. Now, Labour's Stephen Twigg is seeking re-election. Ben Brown has been to Enfield Southgate to ask if voters there will once again place their trust in New Labour.
Along with a platoon of Labour activists, Stephen Twigg is fighting for every single vote here.
Twigg, Stephen, Labour Party, 20,570.
4 years ago, he caused a sensation by beating Michael Portillo, snatching from him a seat that had always been true blue Tory. This time, Mr. Twigg and his campaign team are trying to cling on to a tiny majority of just 1,400 votes. Can they pull it off again?
You didn't expect to win last time. Do you expect to win this time?
I didn't expect to win last time. This time it's going to be close. I've been saying it's 50-50, but I do believe that if we can get a good turnout here, then yes, I can win again.
On paper, Enfield Southgate should be Conservative to the core. Much of it's middle class, affluent. About 80% of homes are owner-occupied. People here do complain about their public services under Labour, but they're also enjoying prosperity, and property prices have rocketed.
It's been very buoyant. The marketplace started at the year very busy. Certainly within the last 4 years, I'd say majority of properties have actually doubled within the last 4 years.
People here are wealthy enough to have their own gardeners. This one doesn't think Labour can hold on to Enfield.
I don't know, very much doubt it.
Think the Tories could get it back?
I've always thought so, yeah. I'm glad to meet you, and I'm one of
the Tory candidate knows if he doesn't win, neither will William Hague.
Obviously, if we don't win this seat back, then we won't be forming, or it's very unlikely that William Hague is forming a government after June 7th. But I think that things are looking good, and this is one we should deliver for William.
Last time, the Liberal Democrat vote was squeezed. Some of their supporters voted tactically for Labour. So have the Lib Dems got a chance?
There's a very strong possibility we could win. If you were to ask Stephen Twigg whether he thought he could win in 1997, I'm sure that he would give you an answer very similar to the one I'm giving you today.
The race in this leafy constituency really is too close to call. If Labour can hang on to it, then they can hang on to power. And if the Tories can't recapture it, then they really are in deep, deep trouble. Watch this one carefully, because just like last time, once you know the result of Enfield Southgate, you should know the result of the general election. Ben Brown, BBC News, Enfield.
And you can find a full list of the candidates standing in the Enfield Southgate constituency on CFAX. The election in Northern Ireland has been dominated by the decommissioning of terrorist weapons and the future of the Good Friday Agreement. Today, weapons inspectors said they were satisfied that IRA weapons dumps were secure, but that statement wasn't enough to satisfy some unionists who remain bitterly opposed to the agreement.
For us, the unionist canvassers, a bruising campaign. For David Trimble, the issue of decommissioning won't go away.
No guns, no government, where are you now? You're getting the money, you're sitting in government with them.
He knows today's declaration from the International Weapons Inspectors that the IRA's arms dumps remain secure won't satisfy skeptics inside his party or the hecklers outside.
This is great.
because most people are appalled at this behaviour and blame the Paisleyite for it.
Is your argument that you're constructive where they are not?
Well, I don't have to make that argument. They're making it for me.
For veteran campaigner Ian Paisley, no internal party doubts or divisions.
Hello there, how are you? Good to see you.
You're looking well, too.
I'm feeling well.
The message from his DUP that David Trimble shouldn't have allowed Sinn Féin into government in advance of IRA decommissioning. He is characteristically confident that the mood within unionism is running his way.
This is the obituary notice, shall I put it that way, of the Good Friday Agreement. It's been dead for a long time. Let's give it a decent burial and get on with something that will prosper the people of Northern Ireland.
What is it? For Jerry Adams, the main campaign focus, the struggle for the votes of young nationalists. He sees today's statement from the weapons inspectors as one stage in a long process. Sinn Féin has wider ambitions.
We want to become the largest party in this state. We're not going to do it this time round, but we're going to move in that direction very decisively. And also, the next election we will pick will be in the south. We're an all-Ireland party, we're an Irish Republican party, so we have that type of view of elections. We'll do very, very well this time around.
No one is more dedicated to taking the gun out of Irish politics than John Hume. He sees power sharing as the fruit of policies his party has followed for years and says it's about to reap the electoral rewards.
We work as a team to build a new society together, because that's where we're at now. We're at building the new society. As I keep saying, we're now back in real politics, the economic growth of our people. And we are the best party. We're the party that is most geared to do that.
The overarching issue in Northern Ireland, the future of power-sharing government at Stormont. That will depend on the summer of hard talking to come after the elections allowed the parties to judge the public mood. Issues like decommissioning remain hugely contentious. But today's statement by the international weapons inspectors that they believe the IRA's arsenal remains safely stored away at least allows the pro-agreement parties to argue that things are moving in the right direction. Kevin Connolly, BBC News, Belfast.
It's just after 29 minutes.